ॐ नमो दिव्याय महादिव्याय शिवाय सत्तं नमो नमो प्रकृते भद्राय नियतापन्था स्मताम् ॐ भूर्भुवस्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् हरिः ओम्. So Buddha's teaching is still admirable because it teaches the humanity about the way of living where everybody could manifest their own fundamental rights. They are privileged provided by law of natural justice. Chapter 10 of the Buddha's teaching tells like the Buddha's chief opponents and supporters. As a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, even so the wise are not ruffled by praise or blame. Dhammapada. The Buddha worked disinterestedly for the weal of mankind, making no distinction between the rich and the poor, the high and the low. His followers and supporters were drawn both from the highest and lowest rungs of the social ladder. So spontaneous was the love, and so profound was the veneration of the people that kings and nobles, millionaires and paupers, payers, folk, and courtesans, men and women of all ranks, vied with one another to be of service to him and make his noble mission a success. The wealthy spent lavishly to erect suitable monasteries for him, while the poor, full of faith, demonstrated their pity in their humble way. With perfect equanimity, he accepted the gifts of the rich and the poor, but showed no partiality to any. Nevertheless, he showed more compassion to the poor and the lowly. Like a bee that extracts honey from a flower without hurting it, he lived amongst his followers and supporters without causing the slightest inconvenience to any. Offering a diverse kinds were showered on him, and he accepted them all with perfect non attachment. Thou absolutely pure in motive and perfectly selfless in his service to humanity, yet in preaching and spreading his teaching, the Buddha had to contend against a strong opposition. He was severely criticized, roundly abused, insulted, and ruthlessly attacked as no other religious teacher had been. His chief opponents were ordinary teachers of rival sects and followers of heretical schools whose traditional teachings and superstitious rites and ceremonies he justly criticized. His greatest personal enemy, who made a vain attempt to kill him, was his own brother in law and an erstwhile disciple, Devadatta. The Buddha and Devadatta. Devadatta was the son of King Supabuddha and Pamita, an aunt of the Buddha. Yashodhara was his sister. He was thus a cousin and brother in law of the Buddha. He entered the order in the early part of the Buddha's ministry together with Ananda and other Shakya princes. He could not attain any of the stages of sainthood but was distinguished for worldly psychic powers. Pothujannika one of his chief supporters was King Ajat who built a monastery for him. During the early part of his career, he led such an exemplary life that even Venerable Sariputta went about Rajgaha extolling him, later overcome by worldly gain and honor and growing jealous of the Buddha. Devadatta became so radically changed in his character that he proved to be the greatest personal enemy of the Buddha. Simultaneously, with the arising of ill will in his heart towards the Buddha, his psychic powers automatically ceased. Despite his evil ways and corrupt life, he had a large following and many admirers, and some even preferred him to Venerable Sariputta. On one occasion, he approached the Buddha and requested him to hand over the leadership of the Sangha to him, as the Buddha was advanced in age. The Buddha straightway refused, saying, "Not even to Sariputta or Mogalanna would I hand over the Sangha. Would I then hand it over to thee?" He was enraged at this refusal and vowed vengeance. To safeguard and maintain the dignity of the Sangha, and Buddha caused a proclamation to be made that Devdutt alone was responsible for anything done by him in the name of the Buddha, the Dhamma, or the Sangha. He therefore conspired with King Ajatashattu to kill the Buddha. Ajatashattu was advised to kill his father and usurp the throne, while he himself decided to kill the Buddha and lead the Sangha. Ungrateful Ajatashattu succeeded in killing his debut father, and Devdatta hired bowmen to murder the Buddha. But contrary to his expectations, all the hirelings became the Buddha's followers. Foiled in his attempt, he himself resolved to kill the Buddha. When the Buddha was walking on the slopes of Gijhakutta, he climbed a peak and mercilessly hurled a rock at Buddha. Fortunately, it struck another piece of rock and a splinter slightly wounded his foot, causing the blood to flow. Jivaka, the physician, attended on him and cured him. Devdutt made another unsuccessful attempt to kill the Buddha by dispatching the elephant Nalagiri after infuriating him with liquor against the teacher. When the ferocious elephant approached the Buddha, the venerable Ananda stepped forward to sacrifice his life for the sake of his master. But the Buddha subdued the beast by his loving kindness, metta. By this last wicked act, Devdutt became extremely unpopular, and public opinion was so much against him that the king was compelled to withdraw his patronage. Devdatta fell into disrepute and all his favors decreased. He now decided to live by deceit. His fertile brain devised another seemingly peaceful plan. With the help of equally evil minded bhikkhus like Kokalika, he thought of causing a schism in the order. He requested the Buddha to enforce the following five rules among the bhikkhus. Number one, that monks should dwell all their lives in the forest. Number two, that they should live on alms back. Number three, that they should wear Pamshakula robes, robes made from rags collected from the dust heap and cemeteries. Number four, that they should live at the foot of a tree. And number five, that they should not eat fish or flesh throughout life. This he did knowing fully well that the Buddha would not assent thereto. He desired to make Buddha's refusal a pretext for disparaging the Buddha and thereby winning the support of the ignorant masses. When this request was made, the compassionate and tolerant Buddha declared that his disciples were free to adopt these rules or not, but would not make them compulsory for all. Devdatta made this refusal a cause for schism in the order. He appealed to the bhikkhus, saying, Brethren, whose words are the nobler, the words of the Tathagata, or the words which I myself have uttered? Whoever desires release from suffering, let him come with me. Newly ordained monks who were not conversant with the Dhamma apparently approached of his demands and went over to him. Accompanied by them, he went to Gayasisa, but Venerable Sariputta and Moggallana, on the advice of the Buddha, went there and succeeded in winning them back after explaining the Dhamma to them. Thereafter, evil days fell upon Devadatta. He fell grievously ill, and before his death, he sincerely repented and desired to see the Buddha, but his bad karma interfered, and he had to die a miserable death without seeing the Buddha. However, he sought refuge in the Buddha at the last moment. Although he suffers in a woeful state for his heinous crimes, yet as a result of the holy life he led during the early part of his career, it is stated that he would become a Pekke Buddha named Athisara in the distant future. Anathapindaka. The chief supporter of the Buddha was Anathapindika, that millennial. Amongst his lay followers, he was regarded as the foremost almsgiver, Dayaka. The original name of Anathapindika, which means the feeder of the helpless, was Sudatta. Owing to his unparalleled generosity, he was latterly known by his new name. His birthplace was Savatthi. One day he visited his brother in law in Rajgaha to transact some business. He did not come forward as usual to welcome him, but Sudatta found him in the backyard making preparations for the feast. On inquiry to his indescribable joy, he understood that those arrangements were being made to entertain the Buddha on the following day. The utterance of the mere word Buddha roused his interest, and he longed to see him, as he was told that the Buddha was living in the Sivtavana forest in the neighborhood and that he could see him on the following morning. He went to sleep. His desire to visit the Buddha was so intense that he had a sleepless night, and he arose at an unusual hour in the morning to start for the Sitavana. It appears that, owing to his great faith in the Buddha, a light emanated from his body. He proceeded to the spot, passing through a cemetery. It was pitch dark, and a fear arose in him. He thought of turning back. Then Sivaka, a Yaksha himself invisible, encouraged him, saying, 100 elephants and horses too, ay, and 100 carriers drawn by mules, 100,000 maidens in their ears, bezaveled rings, all are not worth the 16th fraction of a single strike. Advance, O citizen, go forward thou. Advance for thee is better than retreat. His fear vanished and faith in the Buddha arose in its place. Light appeared again and he courageously sped forward. Nevertheless, all this happened a second time and yet a third time. Ultimately, he reached Sitavana, where the Buddha was pacing up and down in the open air, anticipating his visit. The Buddha addressed him by his family name, Sudatta, and called him to his presence. Anathapindika was pleased to hear the Buddha address him thus and respectfully inquired whether the Buddha rested happily. The Buddha replied, surely at all times happily doth rest the Arhant in whom all fires extinct, who cleaveth not to sensuous desires, cool all his being, rid of all the germs that bring new life, all cumbrance cut out, subdued the pain and pinning of the heart, calm and serene, he resteth happily, for in his mind he hath attended to peace. Kindred Saying Part 1, page 272. Kindred Saying Part 1, page 273. Hearing the Dhamma, he becomes a Shotapanna, a stream winner, and invited the Buddha to spend the rainy season at Savatthi. The Buddha accepted the invitation, suggesting that Buddhas take pleasure in solitude. Anathapindika returned to Savatthi about the part belonging to Prince Jeta at a price determined by covering, so the story goes, the whole site with gold coins, and erected the famous Jetavana monastery at a great cost. Here the Buddha spent 19 rainy seasons. This monastery where the Buddha spent the major part of his life was the place where he delivered many of his sermons. Several discourses which were of particular interest to laymen were delivered to Anathapindika, although he refrained from asking any question from the Buddha, lest he should weary him. Once the Buddha, discouraging on generosity, reminded Anathapindika that alms given to the order of monks together with the Buddha is very meritorious, but more meritorious than such alms is the building of a monastery for the use of the order. More meritorious than such monasteries is seeking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. More meritorious than seeking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha is the observance of the five precepts. More meritorious than such observance is meditation on loving kindness, metta, for a moment. And most meritorious of all is the development of insight as to the fleeting nature of things, vipassana. It is evident from this discourse that generosity is the first stage on the way of Buddhist life. More important than generosity is the observance of at least the five rules of regulated behavior, which tend to the disciplining of words and deeds. See Gradual Saying, Volume 4, page 264 to 65. Still more important and more beneficial is the cultivation of such ennobling virtues like loving kindness, which lead to self development. Most important and most beneficial of all self discipline is the sincere effort to understand things as they truly are. Commenting on the four kinds of bliss a layman may enjoy, the Buddha declared. There are these four kinds of bliss to be won by the householder who enjoys the pleasures of sense from time to time, and when occasion offers, the bliss of ownership, Atti Sukha, the bliss of wealth, Bhoga Sukha, the bliss of debtlessness, Ana Sukha, Ananda Sukha, and the bliss of blamelessness, Anavaji Sukha. What is the bliss of ownership? Herein, a clansman has wealth acquired by energetic striving, amazed by strength of arm, born by sweat, lawful and lawfully gotten. At the thought, wealth is mine, acquired by energetic striving, lawfully gotten. Bliss comes to him, satisfaction comes to him. This is called the bliss of ownership. What is the bliss of wealth? Herein, a clansman by means of wealth acquired by energetic striving both enjoys his wealth and does meritorious deeds therewith. At the thought by means of wealth acquired, I both enjoy my wealth and do meritorious deeds. Bliss comes to him. Satisfaction comes to him. This is called the bliss of wealth. What is the bliss of debtlessness? Herein, a clansman owes no debt, great or small, great or small, to anyone. At the thought, I owe no debt, great or small, to anyone. Bliss comes to him, satisfaction comes to him. This is called the bliss of debtlessness. Gradual Singh, Volume 2, page 77 78, Anguttara Nikaya, Volume 2, page 67 68. What is the bliss of blamelessness? Herein, the Aryan disciple is blessed with blameless action of body, blameless action of speech, blameless action of mind. At the thought, I am blessed with blameless action of body, speech, and mind. Bliss comes to him, satisfaction comes to him. This is called the bliss of blamelessness. Winning the bliss of debtlessness, a man may then recall the bliss of really having. When he enjoys the bliss of wealth, he sees this such by wisdom. When he seeks, he knows. And thus is he wise indeed in both respects, but these have no 1/16th of the bliss that comes to a man of blamelessness. On another occasion, when the Buddha visited the house of Anath Pindika, he heard an unusual uproar inside the house and inquired what it was. Lord, it is Sujata, my daughter in law, who lives with us. She is rich and has been brought here from a wealthy family. She pays no heed to her mother in law, nor to her father in law, nor to her husband, neither does she venerate, honor, reverence, nor respect the exalted one, replied Anathapindika. But the Buddha called her to his presence and preached an illuminative discourse on 7 kinds of wives that exist even in modern society, as it was in the day of old. Whose is wicked in mind, ill disposed, pitiless, fond of other men, neglecting husband, a prostitute, bent on harassing. Such a one is called a troublesome wife. Badhaka Bharya, whose wishes to squander whatever profits thou little that the husband gain, whether by crafts, trade, or plug. Such a one is called a thievish wife. Korabharya, whose is not inclined to do anything, lazy, gluttonous, harsh, cruel, fond of bad speech, lives domineering the industrious. Such a one is called a lordly wife. Ayyabharya, whose is ever kind and compassionate, protects her husband like a mother her son, guards the accumulated wealth of her husband. Such a one is called a motherly wife. Matubharya, whose is respectful towards her husband, just as a younger sister towards her elder brother. Modest, lives in accordance with her husband's wishes. Such a one is called a sisterly wife. Bhagini Bharya, who rejoices at the sight of her husband even as a friend, seeing a companion who has come after a long time, is of noble birth, virtuous, and chaste. Such a one is called a friendly wife. Shakhi Bharya, whose, when threatened with harm and punishment, is not angry but calm, endures all things of her husband with no wicked heart, free from hatred, lives in accordance with her husband's wishes. Such a one is called a handmaid wife. And Dasibharya, the Buddha, describing the characteristics of the 7 kinds of wives, remarked that of them the troublesome wife Vadaka the thieves' wife, Kurabharya, and the lordly wife, Ayabharya, are bad and undesirable ones, while the motherly wife, Matubharya, sisterly wife, Bhagini Bharya, friendly wife, Shaki Bharya, and her handmaid wife, Dasi Bharya, are good and praiseworthy ones. These Sujata are the seven kind of wives a man may have, and which of them are you? Lord, let the exalted one think of me as a handmaid wife, Dasivarya, from this day forth. Anath Pindika used to visit the Buddha daily, and finding that people go disappointed in the absence of the Buddha, wished to know from the Venerable Ananda whether there was a possibility for the devout followers to pay their respect when the Buddha goes out of his preaching tours. This master was reported to the Buddha with the result that the Ananda Bodhi tree, which stands to this day, was planted at the entrance to the monastery. Punnalakhana, a very virtuous lady, was his wife. Mahashubhadda, Kuta Subhadda, and Sumanna were his three devout daughters. The elder two had attained Sotapati, while the youngest was Shakadagami, his only son Kala, who was at first irreligious, later became Sotapanna by the skillfulness of the father. Anath Pindika breathed his last after hearing a profound discourse from Venerable Sariputta. As he was about to die, he sent a messenger to inform the Buddha that he was seriously ill and that he paid his homage to him, and then to request the Venerable Sariputta to have compassion on him and visit him in his house. As invited, the Venerable Sariputta, accompanied by Venerable Ananda, proceeded to his house and inquired about his health. See chapter 9, page 135. Majjhima Nikaya 3 262. Further Dialogues of the Buddha, volume 2, page 302 to 305. He replied that he was suffering from an acute pain and that he saw no signs of progress. The Venerable Sariputta then preached a profound discourse. Tears come to his eyes at the close of the ceremony. Venerable Ananda, seeing him in tears, asked him whether he was sinking. Anath Pindika answered, "Not at all, Venerable Sir. Though I have long attained on the Master and his disciples, never did I hear such a discourse. Such profound discourses are not taught to the white robed laymen, as they cannot comprehend their meaning but are reserved for advanced disciples," replied Venerable Sariputta. But Anath Pindika begged Venerable Sariputta to expound such intricate Dhamma to the laity as well, for there would be some who could understand. Not long before the departure of these two great disciples, Anath Pindika passed away and was immediately reborn in Tushita heaven. At night, Devanath Pindika, illuminating the whole Jata grove, come up to the Buddha, saluted him, and extolling the virtues of Venerable Sariputta, expressed his pleasure on seeing the Buddha and his disciples residing in his monastery, and said, "Goodwill and wisdom, mine by method trained, the highest conduct on good morals based. This maketh mortals pure, not rank nor wealth." Vishakha. Vishakha was the devout and generous daughter of millionaire Dhananjaya. Her mother was Suman Devi, and her beloved grandfather was millionaire Mendaka. Kinder saying part 1, page 80. When she was only 7 years old, the Buddha happened to visit her birthplace, Bhadya. In the kingdom of Anga, her grandfather, hearing of Buddha's visit, said to her, "Dear girl, this is a happy day for you and a happy day for me. Summon the 500 maidens who are your attendants. Mount 500 chariots, and accompanied by your 500 slave maidens, go forth to welcome the Buddha." Readily she agreed and, as advised, went up to the Buddha, saluted him, and sat respectfully at her side. The Buddha was pleased with her refined manners and he preached the Dhamma to her and others. Though young in age, she was comparatively far advanced from a moral standpoint. As such, immediately after hearing the Dhamma, she attained the first stage of sainthood, Sotapatti, in her early age. Books state that even in the prime of her youth, she possessed masculine strength and was gifted with all womanly charms. Her hair was like a peacock's tail, and when loosened, it reached the hem of her skirt, and then the ends of the hair curled and turned upwards. Her lips were of bright red color and were smooth and soft to the touch. Her teeth were white and were evenly set without intersticts and shone like a row of diamonds. Her skin, without the use of any cosmetic, was as smooth as a blue lotus wreath and was a golden color. She retained her youthful appearance although she bore several children. Endowed with these five kinds of feminine beauty, hair, flesh, bone, skin, and youth, young Vishakha excelled both in worldly wisdom and spiritual insight. When she was about 15 or 16 old, on a certain festival day, she went on foot with her retinue in a holiday spirit to the river to bath. Kesha Kalyana, Mamasa Kalyana, Athi Kalyana, Chavi Kalyana, and Voya Kalyana. Suddenly there arose an unexpected shower, and all but young Vishakha ungraciously ran as fast as they could and entered a hall where there were some Brahmins who had come in search of a suitable maiden possessed of the five kinds of beauty for their young master. Cultured Vishakha, without any particular haste, gracefully proceeded at her usual gait and entered the hall with garments and ornaments all wet. The inquisitive Brahmins criticized her for not quickening up her pace as others had done and thus escaping being drenched in the rain. Talented Vishakha rose to the occasion and gave an extempore discourse on deportment according to her view. She said that she could have run even faster, but she refrained from doing so purposely. Then she explained that it was not becoming for a king, adorned with all jewels, to gird up his loins and run in the place court. Likewise, it is not becoming for a fully caprinozoned state elephant to run. It should move about with the natural grace of an elephant. Monks also incur criticism when they run about like ordinary laymen. Likewise, it is not a dignified spectacle to see a woman running about like a man. Brahmins were pleased with her instructive talk and thought that she was an ideal wife for their master. Accordingly, arrangements were made to give her in marriage to their master Punnavadana, himself the son of a millionaire named Migara, who was not a follower of the Buddha. The marriage festival was conducted on an elaborate scale on the wedding day. In addition to a large dowry and an exquisitely rich ornaments, Mahalatapindahana, her wise father, gave her the following admonitions. Number one, do not carry outside the indoor fire. A fire signifies slandering. Number two, do not take inside the outdoor fire. Number three, give only to those that give. Number four, do not give to those that do not give. Number five, give both to those that give and do not give. Number six, sit happily. Seven, eat happily. Eight, sleep happily. Number nine, tend the fire. And number 10, honor the household divinities. Their implied meanings is as follows. Number 1, the wife should not speak ill of her husband and parents-in-laws to others. Neither should their shortcomings nor household quarrels be reported elsewhere. Number 2, a wife should not listen to the reports and stories of other households. Number 3, things should be lent to those who do return them. Number 4, no article should be lent to those who do not return them. Number 5, poor kinsfolk and friends should be helped even if they do not repay. Number 6, a wife should sit in a becoming way on seeing her parents in law or husband. She should keep standing and not sit. Before partaking of her meals, a wife should first see that her parents in law and husbands are served. She should also see that her servants are well cared for. Number 8, before sleep, a wife should see that all doors are closed, furniture is safe, servants have performed their duties, and that parents in law have retired. As a rule, a wife should rise early in the morning, and unless unwell, she should not sleep during the day. Number 9, parents in law and husbands should be regarded as fire. One should deal carefully with them as one would deal with fire. And number 10, parents in law and husbands should be regarded as divinities. It is noteworthy that the Buddha himself refers to parents in law as divinities, Shasudeva. On the day she arrived in Savatthi, the city of her husband, she was showered with various presents sent from people of all rank according to their status and ability. But so kind and generous was she that she distributed them amongst the donors themselves with a kind message and treated all the residents of the city as her own kinsfolk. By this noble gesture, on the very first day she came to her husband's home, she became endeared to all the people of the city. There is an incident in her life which reveals her dutiful kindness even towards animals. Hearing that her well bred mare gave birth to a foal in the middle of the night, immediately she repaired to the stable with her female attendants bearing torches in their hands and attended to all the mare's needs with the greatest care and attention. As her father-in-law was a staunch follower of Nigantha Nathaputta. He invited a large number of nagged ascetics to his house for alms. On their arrival, Vishakha was requested to come and render homage to these so-called arahants. She was delighted to hear the word arahant and hurried to the hall only to see naked ascetics devoid of all modesty. The sight was too unbearable for a refined lady like Vishakha. She reapproached her father in law and retired to her quarters without entertaining them. The nagged ascetics took offense and found fault with the millennials for having brought a female follower of the ascetic Gautama to his house. They asked him to expel her from the house immediately. The millionaire pacified them. One day he sat on a costly seat and began to eat some sweet rice porridge from a golden bowl. At that moment, a bhikkhu entered the house for alms. Vishaka was fanning her father in law, and without informing him of his presence, she moved aside so that he might see him. Although he saw him, he continued eating as if he had not seen him. Vishaka politely told the bhikkhus, "Pass on. Venerable sir, my father in law is eating stale fare." Purnam. The ignorant millionaire, misconstruing her words, was so provoked that he ordered the bowel to be removed and Vishaka to be expelled from the house. Vishaka was the favorite of all the inmates of the house, and so nobody dared to touch her. Nobody dared to touch her. But Vishaka, disciplined as she was, would not accept without protest such treatment even from her father in law. She politely said, "Father, this is no sufficient reason why I should leave your house. I was not brought her by you like a slave girl from some ford. Doubters whose parents are alive do not live like this. It is for this very reason that my father, when I set out to come here, summoned 8 clansmen and entrusted me to them, saying, If there be any fault in my daughter, investigate it. Send word to them and let them investigate my guilt or innocence." The millionaire agreed to her reasonable proposal and summoning them said, "At a time of festivity, while I was sitting and eating sweet milk rice porridge from a golden bowl, this girl said that I was eating what was unclean. Convict her of this fault and expel her from the house." Vishaka proved her in her innocence, stating that it is not precisely what I said. When a certain bhikkhu was standing at the doors for alms, my father in law was eating sweet milk rice porridge, ignoring him, thinking to myself that my father, without performing any good deed in this life, is only consuming the merits of past deeds. I told the bhikkhu, "Pass on, venerable sir. My father in law is eating stale fare. What fault of mine is there in this?" She was acquainted of the charge, and of the father in law himself agreed she was not guilty. But the spiteful millionaire charged her against for having gone behind the house with the male and female attendants in the middle watch of the night. When she explained that she actually did so in order to attend on a mare in travel, the clansmen remarked that their noble daughter had done an exemplary act which even a slave girl would not do. She was thus acquitted of the second charge too. But the revengeful millionaire would not rest until she was found guilty. Next time he found fault with her for no wrong of hers. He said that before her departure from home, her father gave her 10 admonitions. For instance, he said to her, "The indoor fire is not to be taken out of doors. It is really possible to live without giving fire even to our neighbor on both sides of us." Questioned the millionaire. She availed herself of the opportunity to explain all the 10 admonitions in detail to his entire satisfaction. The millionaire was silenced and he had no other charges to make. Having proved her innocence, self respecting Vishaka now desired to leave the house as she was ordered to do so at first. The millionaire's attitude towards Vishaka was completely changed, and he was compelled to seek pardon from his daughter in law for what he had uttered through ignorance. Forbearing Vishaka in accordance with her true Buddhist spirit, granted him pardon on condition that he would give complete freedom to her to carry on her religious activities as she desired. Her father in law readily agreed to this and granted her full freedom to perform her religious activities. Now Vishaka lost no time in inviting the Buddha to the house for alms. The Buddha came and had his meal. After the meal was over, the Buddha expounded a sermon. The millennial sat behind a curtain and listened to the sermon. The millennial sat behind a curtain and listened to the sermon. At the end of the discourse, he became Shotapanna and acknowledged his boundless gratitude to his daughter in law for having initiated him into the true path of deliverance, and emotionally remarked that he would hereafter regard Vishaka as his mother. Later on, when she bore a son, she called him Mikara. On the following day, the Buddha visited her house, and on that occasion, her mother in law heard the Dhamma and became a Shotapanna stream winner. By her tact, wisdom, and patience, she gradually succeeded in converting her husband's household to a happy Buddhist home. Daily, Vishaka used to give alms to the Sangha at her own house. Both in the forenoon and afternoon, she used to visit the monastery to minister to the needs of the Sangha and hear sermons from the Buddha. Supia, another devout Buddhist lady, usually accompanied her during her visits. Vishakha was so generous and so serviceable to the Sangha that once she approached the Buddha and asked for the following eight boons. Number one, to give robes to the Sangha during the rainy seasons as long as she lived. Number two, to provide alms for the bhikkhus coming to Shavatti. Number three, to provide alms for those going out of Shavatti. Number four, to give food for sick bhikkhus. Number five, to give food for those who attend on the sick. Number six, to give medicine for the sick bhikkhus. Number seven, to give rice gruel for bhikkhus. And number eight, to give bathing garments for nuns. The Buddha granted these boons to her. One day Vishaka happened to visit the monastery, dogged in her best garments presented to her by her father as a dowry. But as she thought it was unseemly to see the Buddha so gaily decked, she made a bundle of it, gave it to the slave girl, and went to the Buddha, dressed in another garments given to her by her father in law. After this ceremony, she left the monastery accompanied by the slave girl, who forgot to take the bundle which was placed in her custody. Venerable Ananda saw it, and as instructed by the Buddha, kept it in a safe place to be returned to the owner. Vishaka, on hearing that the bundle was inadvertently left by the maid, asked her to bring it back unless Venerable Ananda had touched it. When what had happened was reported to Vishaka, she went to the Buddha and expressed her desire to do something beneficial with the money realized by seeing the garments. The Buddha advised her to erect a monastery at the east gate for the use of the Sangha, as no one had the means to buy the costly garments. She herself bought it back and erected a monastery at a great cost and named it Ubarama. As invited by Vishaka, the Buddha and his disciples spent the Vasana period in the new spacious monastery. Great was Vishaka's joy when the Buddha spent 6 rainy seasons there. Books state that the kind Vishaka, instead of chastising the slave girl for her apparent negligence, transferred to her a share of the merit acquired by erecting the monastery, because the slave girl had given the occasion for this good deed. On various occasions, several discourses were delivered to Vishaka by the Buddha. In one discourse, the Buddha spoke on the observance of the eight precepts by laymen on Uposatha days, which observance prevails in almost all Buddhist countries in Asia up to this day. dealing with the eight qualities that make a woman seek birth in happy states, the Buddha said, active alert to cherish him always, and not to that man who brings her every joy she offers. Slight nor will a good wife move to wreck her husband by some spiteful boy, and she reversed all whom her lord doth honor, for she is wife, deft, nimble, upbeatiness. Usually, the first, 8th, 15th, and 23rds of the lunar month are regarded as as the Uposatha or holy days when lay followers observe the following 8 precepts Atta Shila, namely abstinence from killing, stealing, incelibacy, lying, lying, liquor, eating food after midday, dancing, singing, music unseemingly shown, using garlands, perfumes, unguents, ornaments, and using high-end luxurious sheets. Though, as a rule, they are sometimes observed on Uposatha days. There is no objection to practicing them on any convenient day, the object being to control deeds, words, and 5 senses. She minds his wealth amid this folk at work and sweetly orders all a wife like this, who will her husband's wife and will complies is born again, where lovely devas dwell. In another discourse, the Buddha, referring to the 8 qualities in a woman that tend to will and happiness in this world, and in the next, spoke as follows. Here in Vishakha, a woman is capable of her work. She manages the servants in her ways. She is lovely to her lord. She guards his wealth. Here in Vishakha, a woman is accomplished in trustful confidence, sadha, virtue, shila, charity, kaga, and wisdom, panna. Being a lady of many parts, she played an important role in various activities connected with the sasana. At times, she was deputed by the Buddha to settle disputes that arose amongst bhikkhunis. Some Vinaya rules were also laid down for bhikkhus owing to her intervention. Owing to her magnanimity, she was regarded as the chief benefactress of the Sasana and the greatest female supporter of the Buddha. By her dignified conduct, graceful deportment, refined manners, courteous speech, obedience and reverence to elders, compassion to those who are less fortunate, kind hospitality, and religious zeal, she won the hearts of all who knew her. Books state that she had the good fortune to be the happy mother of 10 fortunate sons and 10 fortunate daughters. She died at the ripe age of 120. Gajwal Sayings, page 178 179. Similarly, Jivaka the fosterling, Jivaka was the celebrated physician of the Buddha. Immediately after his birth, he was placed in a casket and was cast away by his mother, a curtain or a dust heap by the roadside. Prince Abhay, a son of King Bimbisara, who happened to pass the way, saw the helpless infant surrounded by crowns and discovering that he was alive, Jivati caused him to be given to the care of the nurses. As he was found alive, he was named Jivika. Being adopted by a prince, he was called Komarabhaka. Growing up, he became a skillful physician and surgeon. Books state that he made 2 successful operations on a millionaire who was suffering from a severe headache. He used to attend on the Buddha 3 times a day. When the Buddha's foot was wounded by a splinter caused by the hurling of a rock by Devadatta, it was Jivaka who attended on him and healed him. Realizing the manifold advantages of having a monastery close to his residence, he erected one in his mango park. After the consecration ceremony of this monastery, he became a stream winner, Shotapanna. Jivaka Sutta, which deals with the questions of eating flesh, was delivered by the Buddha to Jivaka. It was Jivaka who induced King Ajatasattu to visit the Buddha after his parricide. At his request, Buddha enjoined upon his disciples to take physical exercise such as sweeping, etc. So it continues like this, and the next one would be like chapter 11 will deal about the Buddha's royal patrons, and the class would continue. So I concluded here today. You can review, you can look after the things, and search for the word meanings for improving your vocabularies as well as understanding the essence of the talk delivered by this chapter, the way how this sequence of event happen and what are the its uh, what we can say mesmerizing parts that enchants the audience and the followers of Buddha, and still Buddhism is flourishing across the globe. Om Namah Shivaya. Harihi Yam